what I want to say is that I'm very happy to be here, and that what I'm going to show you are the result of a long-lasting project which started in 1997 when Palestine was very different from now. And what we tried to do was to go ahead with the preservation of the really immense cultural heritage of this land. It's a very hard task, you know this better than me, and I think that any publication that we succeed in having, which has a solid scientific basis, is a good contribute to the knowledge of this land. Then there is, of course, another step, that is the way of narrating this story, because this story belongs to the humankind, the whole humankind. And the way of narrating it is very important, because we have to transmit it to future generation, and the future generation will not be interested in the life of archaeologists, which are always self-celebrative. And as you know, as guide, I don't like this kind of yes, of course, there is a focus on some big figures, but what is important is what previous generation have done. What they've done, we are speaking about 200 generations before us. We are the children of these guys. So it's really impressive, because Tell Sultan especially is really an incredible site from the point of view of the history of the humankind. So this is the the title which I gave 2 years ago, that is From Biblical Archaeology to Historical Archaeology, Critical Paradigm Challenges. But I don't want to annoy you with these things, because you have the mind full of ideology, especially in this country. I just want to show you, this is just a watercolor of what is the main view of the site from the top of the Spring Hill. Actually, the tell is a real tell, but what is kept of the tell is only roughly half of the tell, because the other half was on the other side of the spring. And as also in Italy happens, one half is belonged by the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, and the other half by the municipality. In the middle there is the road, and there was no way to find out a unique archaeological site. This, for example, is an endeavor which I leave for the future generation, to create one unique big site, including the spring, which was the heart of the site. As you see, we have been excavating in many areas, and it is really a difficult site to dig, because it has been excavated by 4 expeditions during the history of archaeology, and so there is a lot of damp, and there is also a lot to study to dig this site, because you have to read the books of the others. The location, from the point of view also of geography and geology, is of course a very special one, a very fortunate one, because of course Jericho is also an oasis, and the reason of the oasis is basically the Ain Sultan and the other 2 big springs, which are in the nearby Ain Duke and Ain Loja, which is right here, but Ain Duke and Ain Sultan are the responsible of the main oasis. This is the site, and this is the necropolis, and again the focus on the main center of the site, the extension of the original village, the extension in the early Bronze Age, the extension in the Middle Bronze Age, the extension in the Iron Age. Unfortunately, many of these areas have been destroyed, not only in recent times, during the long history of this site. In any case, what is kept safe is still relevant for everybody. You see here the spring. The spring was actually the main reason for the earliest inhabitants to settle near it on a limestone proton. So under the protection of God, let's go into this very long history. So I apologize if I will shorten some problems which sometimes are really very difficult also for scholars. So these are the people who worked in Jericho. What is noticeable, and as the earliest excavators were German and Austrian, and they published a big book after a few years, they are an example because at that time they already published a big book with good drawings, so we can still use this book for the beginning of the excavation. Then there was John Garstan, who was a British, who was a very distinguished archaeologist who had worked in Egypt, but he was, in some ways, he went to Jericho because, I have to say, they wanted to exploit the fame of Jericho for becoming famous and getting money. So the problem was also the Bible, and notwithstanding all these things, he, as a skilled archaeologist, he became aware of one of the important values of this site, that is its Neolithic and its prehistoric occupation. Nobody had understood before that this was a famous, an important Neolithic site. Then there are these, you see, almost 6 or 7 years of the second British expedition after the Second World War. And these are very well established and famous because Kathleen Kenyon not only was a great archaeologist, but also experimented a new method in Tell Sultan. So Tell Sultan is considered an example for the general archaeology, not only for the archaeology of Palestine, but in general, as a site where they invented the stratigraphic archaeology. That means cutting everything vertically to understand the history on the sections of these essays, of these soundings. What was the problem? That in many times the control of the horizontal excavation was not so accurate as it was the vertical one. And in some cases, nowadays, we would not cut the city wall straightforward just to see how it is in the section, because we keep also the value of the monument as a monument, as something that we can, the people appreciate and let understand. So this has changed, and there are several steps in the history of the comprehension of the site. I don't have time to go in each step of this story, but what I want just to stress is that usually history is used by the totalitarians to interpret history for their own goals. This is out of our approach, and we had a completely different attitude that was, let's try to understand what they created, because it's not so easy. And past is past, respect it, accept it, and keep it as a common memory. Successes and failures of past society, tragedies and cultural peaks have not factual relationship with modern societies, in the sense that we have the responsibility, we can be stimulated, we can take the example, what is important is this, and we can use it just for our own goals nowadays. So I think it's clear, and it is really a pleasure to see that there is still many people who are interested in the history of Palestine and in the history of humankind as seen from such a unique site. So this is the timeline, the phases which we have established for the first time for the old site, and these are the favorite games of archaeologists that change labels, names, and sometimes it is boring, sometimes excessive, because what is interesting is that each of these names, each of this definition, which is taken from at the beginning from the Greek history, and is connected to, let's say, technological steps in the history, like Stone Age and so on, they refer to a cultural horizon. So one should also be careful in distinguishing between cultural horizon and time, because sometimes we mix these things, while as we have nowadays this terrible radiocarbon, we can have the exact date of a seed taken in all this timeline. As we pick it from the dig, we know that this time has nothing to do with cultural horizon. So we study cultural horizon, that means that vessel with that kind of a funerary custom, which means a culture. And then the time of this culture is another problem, because you can have, for example, when I was a child and I went into the living room of my grandmother, I was 50 years before, because all things were still kept as when she was young. So this was found some days ago. Is one of the beautiful lithic example from the side. Is a knife, is a flint, is made of obsidian, transparent obsidian, which is like virtual glass, and it was imported from Anatolia. So that's very important, because as they started to settle, they also started to trade things in a simple way with exchange, but in an effective way, because they could have incredible materials also from very long distances. So I would annoy you with these definitions. What is important is that the Paleolithic is the time in which human communities used to kill to survive. This is the basic idea. For 300,000 years, each morning, man woke up and had to kill some animals to survive, if not another human. While when they understood that they could live in a place, they did a revolution which is not only a technological and cultural revolution, it's a mind revolution. They decided to switch to generate life to survive, which is much better. And if we just succeed, hi Dr. Ta, if we just succeed in keeping this step, that is moving from killing to generate life as a lifestyle, is a great achievement. You know, you understand this. This was done in Intel Sultan towards between 12,000 and 10,000 before present. So it's really a very important step in the life of the humankind. This drawing shows one of the main, what I think is a symbol of the site, but also a symbol of this early, very early agricultural community. That is the round tower of Tel Sultan. And this tower was built by a human community together. So it's larger than what an individual family or a single could build. That means that they found a way of life. They organized themselves to dedicate time to take big stone boulders, because inside the staircase there are slabs, very heavy. So that means that they have to carry them on wooden beams, and it was really a very strategic endeavor, because it had to protect what was at that time, let's say, the treasure of this early community, that is what they could harvest from the earliest cereals that they were able to cultivate. They had domesticated these plants. It was really an extraordinary success. Actually, these plants were living in the wilderness, but they had to, it took times, at least 2 millennia, to transform them from the wild species into the domesticated one. And this gave the community really the fuel for a growth, which is really impressive, and it's demonstrated in many fields, not only in architecture, which was invented by this community. And as soon as they could, they started to use these bricks, which are loaf-shaped, and so that means that they have a convex surface, but they could use them very well, because they use mortar, and already in the earliest mortar they put ashes, which make the mortar stronger. So they could experiment technological materials already at the time of the pre-pottery Neolithic. So before inventing pottery, they already invented architecture. So that's very nice. And it's also nice how they could plaster, we will see in the houses, their own houses. Then there was what has been called a town wall. Now, I have to say that there is, I always listen these tour guides explaining one theory, which was a theory of an Israeli scholar, a distinguished historian, Bar Yosef, who thought that there were flash floods hitting the site, and so it was necessary to build this wall. But I think that this theory is not well. I wonder if he has visited the site, because actually the site is not exactly in the wadi at the feet of the Jebel Kuruntul, but there is another ridge, and the ridge it's a small one, so it protects the site, this ridge, from the wadi. The wadi is down, and the wadis are all around it, but they don't go. So I think that it's in the meantime there was in Turkey has been discovered an amazing site, which is Göbekli Tepe, which is contemporary and which has huge circles with huge stones. It's like a huge sanctuary of this pre-pottery Neolithic age. And I think that this wall is a defensive wall, but possibly is also one of these huge circles of the pre-pottery Neolithic. So I really think that the story of Jericho is not all written. And I think that as soon as the Ministry of Tourism could restore this monument, we will have many other surprises, because it is really something unique. And of course there is the staircase inside, and this is a possible reconstruction of a house of the village. What is interesting is that they continued in the earliest PPNA village to hunt the gazelle. We have to say that the environment of Jericho is very special. This also occurs in Bethlehem. That is that, as studied also of ancient DNA are demonstrating, the animals of this area and the plants are more similar to Africa than to Asia, because the Araba Valley, the Wadi Araba and the lower Jordan Valley received for millennia people and animals and things arriving from Africa. So that means that the whole region looked like Africa, and there were lions, there were leopards, there were hippopotamus. So something is different, and this is why the animal which lives there is called gazella. This is the species is the most represented is there in the Jordan Valley. So they continue to hunt it. In the meantime, that they were starting to herd sheep and goats. So capro ovines, they have started to use them completely in PPNB. That is the following step of this incredible history. And you see here one of the ibex, one of the animals which were part of this diet of the site. Then what happened? There was something which was striking also for Cutting Canyon, that there were 12 bodies which have been found within the tower, and scholars have interpreted this either as a kind of strange burial, but because of the displacement of the bones, she thought that they had been killed. They died in a violent way. So the idea is that after some time, also this community, which started with like a very well-organized one, started to have problems, and there were riots or some other things. So this is just to say that since the beginning there are problems that a human community has to solve, not only how to survive day by day, but also how to have relationship between individuals and the community. In the next step, I was mentioning the invention of architecture, but here they invented the brick, and the brick is really a smart invention, because it's a modular object with which you can do any kind of construction, and they shift to rectangular architecture. That means that they could share walls, and they could share houses, and they could expand houses as they needed in easiest way in respect of circular huts, which were typical of PP&A. In PP&B there is also a distinguishing kind of plaster that they could use. We are already before the invention of pottery, but they started to test different kind of material to plaster things. For example, houses always have, they never have corners, they always have curve. So the architecture was like, I don't know if you know Gaudí, was something all curvilinear. This is an example, you see, and you see how the plaster is fine, and it is a skin which is so resistant that Kenyon stated that she could pour water over it, and it was not absorbed. So it's really amazing. They use plaster also for modeling these skulls, and this is really a long story. I can't go into this. Actually, the separation of skulls is something which started in PP&A, and Jericho, just to give you the importance of the site, there have been almost 100 separated skulls known in all the Neolithic sites of the Fertile Crescent, that is from Iran to the Nile Delta. There are 100 skulls known. 45 have been found in Tell Sultan. So this site alone is half of the almost half of the all known separated skulls in Neolithic period, in pre-pottery Neolithic period, and this tradition was connected with the starting of agriculture, because it was a way to keep the memory of the ancestors, and this was very relevant when you are an agriculturalist, because your grandfather is also the owner of your land. So if you keep his head, his skull with you, you have the material proof of your property. So this is a possibility which has been, there are also houses, we will see. At the beginning, these skulls were separated without plastering them. And there are 26 separated skulls without plastering, and there are 13 which have been plastered in PP&B. And of course, here the Israeli, which found one in Israel, have exaggerated because they have done this. But of course, what is inside? Inside is mud. Simply, it was filled up and then plastered. What is important is that plastering, it's something to transform this ancestor in something different, because they put shells in the eyes. They changed the human look. And this was intentional, because they could replicate humans as they are, but they wanted to do them in a way which we can call, if you want, art, or something which moves it outside from the ordinary life and put them in another space-time, which maybe is that of religion. That means the cult of the ancestors. So you see, this was an old man which has been found in a corner of a house, and there is another important discovery which is connected to this, which was done by Garstan. That the Garstan was digging a shrine, which is over there, of the Neolithic, which is really a very, very important find. This is the plan of the shrine, and nearby the shrine he found 2 pits full of these fragments, and these fragments are nearly similar to another one which was found by Kenyon. And of course, all of you remember that these kind of things in PPNB are similar to the famous statues from Ain Ghazal, which were found all together and which have this kind of stylization. And one of the pieces, perhaps the most famous one, was found in one of these pits. And the head actually used to be in the Palestine Archaeological Museum in Jerusalem. Then it was illegally moved to the Israeli Museum, and this is a problem. And where they produced this attempt of reconstructing the original statue, I don't know what they took as example. I think the Michelin, because then I went to, by chance in October 2014, I had the chance in the storerooms of the Louvre in Paris to discover that, for a strange story that I don't have the time to tell you, the British had sent the pieces of the statue to the French. There are priests involved, and I don't want to enter into these stories. And the French had sent them to the Louvre, because you know the French are very chauvinistic, so they sent them to the capital city. And when I found, I really was amazed, because these are much beautiful than as they were reconstructed in the museum, and they belong to that. There is all the body, and the leg is painted, and there are also traces of ropes. That means ropes made in PPNB to let the statue be standing. And so this is a reconstruction. Now I asked to the curator of the Louvre Museum to try to reconstruct the old statue, which will be the oldest known statue of humankind. And as we have the original restored, I hope that it can be handed back to Palestine, or that we can have a copy and put the copy in another, the future museum of the site in Tel Sultan. What is really, there are 6 toes at the foot, and this means that this guy was a monster, the Latin would say, something different from what is usual attested, and this was considered a reason to be connected to the divine sphere. So it's really interesting. I have to say that these statues are triads. That means a man, a woman, and a child, and only the man has been, because of male chauvinism, has been restored. But we need to restore also the female and the child. I hope that the Louvre will do this and will organize also an exhibition about this, because it's really a striking discovery. They were forget in a box in the storeroom. I discovered them just by chance, because I was there studying another vessel. I went there for a vessel that you will see further on if we arrive at that time in the lecture. Then there was a hiatus in the history of the site. There is the hypothesis that the spring of Ain Sultan, because of earthquake, had some problems. So they moved in another amazing site, which is in this beautiful landscape of the Jericho Oasis, that is Tel El Mafjar, a site which has been excavated by the Palestinian Department of Antiquities and the University of Bergen in Norway, a project which was led by Dr. Taha. And this site is a Chalcolithic site. It's really a very important site, because we follow the same community in the same area which had to move. And so this site is lived only one period, let's say. And as they went back to Tel Sultan, possibly because the spring started again to live, they, as they went back there, they were arriving from possibly Jordan. This is shown by the most recent research, and they were agriculturalists, but they settled again. So we should start to imagine history not as a simple line, but as several events which sometimes we don't understand how they are connected. I think that the theory of relativity of Einstein can help us to understand that time is not exactly something as a line. We have some lights, then we have some moments in which we don't know what happened, and also the length of the time is still moving. But this is not important, because as the theory of relativity has demonstrated, what is important is who was the people who lived there. This is our question. Who were they? What they did and why they did this or that? And what is the lesson for us? We are the observer. We should try keep something at the end. This was the lesson of the Latin, of the Romans, that they historia magistra vitae. So they started again, and this is northern Syria, but just to suggest a possible roof for this kind of huts. But I think there are also a sample in Palestine in vernacular architecture, how to close a dome. And there was a small shrine in this earliest village, and this shrine was called by Gaston Babylonian shrine, but it was not wrong, because the style is similar to what is known from Iraq, and are the archaeologists which study each region separated from the other, and they think that some is in a way and the other is in another, but actually, as we are demonstrating with DNA, they were mixed up, and there are many things which were exchanged already in early times, like the early bronze one. So, cult installation, a major tomb which was uncovered west of the site. This tomb was a familiar tomb, so this marks a distinguished change, because they started to bury people in a dedicated cave. In the previous period, they used to bury under the floor of the houses. So they liked to keep the ancestor nearby. And this can be understood, because one would not separate from our beloved parents easily. While they moved to a tomb, because the funerary ritual became something important for the family. It was very important to have a place of the family. And we have the proof that some of these tombs lasted for centuries, and there were 300-400 people buried inside it. And they had this problem, as we sometimes have, at least in Italy, to move, to create space for new dead people. And so they collected only skulls. They put long bones from one side, and the latest buried person, or the most important one, started to be put over, let's say, a bed of stones or a bed made of wood. So these are finds from these tombs. For example, goat metacarpal transformed into flutes. These are also very interesting, because they are the beginning of music, and these also are symbols of life, symbols of Renaissance. And here you have also a common hut. You see, with this one, which is called the apsidal house, actually was a common hut, and there is also a differentiation in pottery styles. That's also very interesting, because as agriculture was definitely established, they started to paint pottery and to distinguish pottery for the different use. For example, one distinguished production is that one, which is called line painted, and this is influenced by the Nakada pottery in Egypt. So there were early relationship with Egypt, where the Egyptian pharaonic state was growing up at that time. It is the time in which Egypt was for the first time unified. So it's really nice. It's really interesting to study it. You see, this vessel is important because this was found by the Palestinian-Italian expedition on the site, while all the other samples have been found in tombs. So that means that also there were houses of, let's say, more rich people which could use these decorated vessels. Then all this that I illustrated up to now is, let's say, the prehistoric premises of another major step which occurred about 3000 BC. That is the establishment of a real city as we consider. And I have to say to you, as I am in Palestine, that I had to struggle many times with scholars from other sides I don't want to mention, because they don't like that Jericho is called a city. I don't know why. But at the end, this was definitely established. And I think that also from this point of view, we will have more surprises in the future from Palestine, because Palestine has many fortified towns or cities at that time, and there are some indicators of this. Of course, in the case of Jericho, there is the freshwater availability, which made it easy to build mud bricks, to herd animals, to cultivate as usual. But what is important is that in the cultivation of the oasis, they had to organize the society in a hierarchical way, because since the beginning, as our expedition has discovered, there is a palace of a ruler, of a lord, or if you want, you can call a king, which was just overlooking the spring. So there is the spring, 20 meters far away, there is the palace. That means that the king wants to be sure how to use the water, and the pool of the spring was very early transformed with canals, and we have found the pottery of this period in the oasis along the canals. So that means that the canals were established already in the beginning of the 3rd millennium BC. And the system was very easy. There were 2 main canals running north-south, that means on the same elevation, to let the largest area to be irrigated. And then there was a main central one which had many different branches. So also the plan of the canal was very logic, and that means that there is one ruler who decided how to cultivate the oasis. Then, of course, there were many families and people and peasants cultivating it. As soon as this was established, the site could produce more than it needed to survive. So there was an accumulation of what is called technically a surplus, that means wealth. And this wealth was reinvested in trade to get materials, raw materials, and in controlling the territory. The people of Jericho could control the northern bank of the Dead Sea. That means salt, which was really gold in antiquity, as now, and bitumen and many other raw materials. So really, a city was starting. This has been narrated in a very boring book, but I think that I could write someone new, more easy to be read. And what was the symbol of this early city? The city walls. So the city walls, why they are the symbol? Because you see the earliest one. Because for the first time, an organized community produced 2 million of bricks, all the same. And this means that there are groups of workers, and the total length is about 800 meters. The width of the wall started with 2.2 meters, and then it became 4 meters in time, because they had to widen it. And you see here that they double it. There is the original wall, and then at a certain point in the following stage, they enlarged it, adding 2 walls, one from one side, one from the other. Another thing that they added were towers. The towers were horseshoe shaped, And of course the towers were entered from the top for a reason of security. So if the enemies could enter into the tower, they could not do anything because there was not a door. The door was from top. And we could even, finding the remains in this area of the city wall, to suggest that this was the location of the gate, unfortunately under the road, but because the modern road is actually the old road, it's always the same road. And the road had to pass through the spring and the palace, because this was the area in which, let's say, the territorial power was exercised. So this is a reconstructed plan of the city. This part actually was excavated, and of course the center was here, and the oasis and the spring were involved. These were work of the municipality, which allow to show this, and you see the survey along the canals with the pottery. So another element which is important, and with the rise of the earliest city, is the domestication and intense use of cows, of cattle. This is really a shift, because cattle can help the community in agriculture much better than donkeys, which are precious, but they are not so strong. And you see that Palestine was rich in cows. I don't know nowadays, but at that time in antiquities it was. And so after all this, I don't want to annoy you with these things which I had to write for scholars, which discuss that is a city, and then I ended with this answer, which is much easier, because Jericho was a Palestinian city. That is, for me, it's easy to state this. It was an earliest city. And what I mean with Palestinian, because you know there are sometimes problems. I not always. I have to say I never speak in Palestine. I always speak abroad, and I always are attacked. I mean that the community of that site could develop a city in that kind of environment, because each city has its own resources, its own construction, where it is funded. And so that means that the population of this city invented many things, like the canals, and for example, they have an extensive use of flint. Why? Because there is flint. There is a lot of flint. So it's much easier to become skilled in cutting flint and transforming flint in knives, axes, chisels, any kind of instrument that go far away to get copper. Of course, as they become rich, they went to get copper because they could. They could pay merchants, they could send donkey caravans to the south, and you know the copper was in Jordan, in Wadi Fainan, and in the Sinai at Timna. These were the only two sources of copper. So that means that Araba, the Wadi Araba, actually was really a motorway in antiquity, because there were people going back and forth from this copper and for the salt. And we will see, this is a reconstructed view. Everything ended in a terrible earthquake, and there is the evidence of this. So the earliest city wall fell down, and when they were rebuilt, you see this happened in many sites. So it was a period of earthquakes. This we in Italy have experimented last year, that we had 2 earthquakes in one day, very strong. So it can happen. And the chronology of this period has been re-established after another long fight. You see the date of this paper in 2019. It took 2 years to have this published, but now what is that our contribution, the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, is established in the literature, and we have demonstrated that the Palestine and Egypt, Syria, Palestine and Egypt had a parallel growth in this period. So this is really a basis for the knowledge. And what happened in the following period? The palace has been reconstructed, much greater than it was, and now we using the work of many other of the other excavators, we can reconstruct a map of it. These are the second city walls with impressive remains, even with the plaster of the city. I just want to mention one thing. We discovered that the main city wall was white, was painted in white. And the main Egyptian city, which was Memphis at that time, is famous because his name was White Wall. The name, because, so it perhaps they were inspired by the Egyptian to have the city completely white. So you could see it from far away. And these walls were really the symbol of the community because they were greatest architectural endeavor to build such a long, all made of mud brick, not of stone. The stone was only in the foundation. I don't go into the details because it's too complicated. You see, so the city walls have the purpose of protect the city and state its urban status, then offer labor because the area of Jericho is not only agriculture in the oasis, is all the steppe, all the wilderness of the desert, full of nomads, of people herding sheep and goats, and they could be involved into the city as they arrived in summer, and they left the animals in the oasis, and they could work for the king. This was a trick of the king to keep the alliance, a deal with these guys, because otherwise these tribes could be dangerous. They could attack the city to get what the city had accumulated, because this was the other problem now, that the cities become too rich in respect of what was not a city, and it was easier to attack the city to get money. So here the private houses, this is a drawing. There are many finds. The finds are really interesting, even when they are not so apparent. For example, small stones which are balance weights means that they were trading metals, such as like silver, or this kind of pottery which is imported from the north, and exactly, and possibly is connected to an influence of some population arriving from Turkey. So it's there is also a change in time of people. And again, we move to the palace. The palace has been refurbished, and this is really, we are proud to have done this with the Ministry of Tourism, with the cooperation which is lasting since 20 years. That is to keep this monument, because it's unique. There are no monuments, even in the famous Megiddo, there is not a palace like this. And the palace means that the community not only could go and worship in the temple, but can organize in an effective way policy. So this was as it is, because several parts have not been excavated by us. We have excavated this main wall and the green part, but we have the plan and the photos of the others. So as I put all together, it becomes really a huge palace, and there are striking finds, and there are also cylinder seals. This is very important because that means that there is a public administration. The problem in Palestine is that the seals, which are cylinders of 3, 4, 5 centimeters, 2 centimeters in diameter, so maximum 3, are made, in my area, are made of olive tree. So olive wood. So they were not kept. We just found once some broken fragments burned. Otherwise they are lost. But they were the signature of the officials of the palace. And I think that the main palatial symbol was this one. Look here. It's very schematic, but you see which animal is this. This is a lion, and what it's doing is catching a gazelle. And you know this from Jacob. Is a very, so the same subject is preserved for millennia in the same area, because of course it's what they used to see, but there is also a symbolic meaning, that is that the king is the one protecting the community since the prehistory, when the stronger leader had to catch the animals to feed the population. So it's really a strong symbol, because it's a symbol that we can date down to the Paleolithic, when they were hunters. And then we found many other interesting things like this. The seashells were used to count money, and they were not only ornaments, they were like coins today. It's nice, this, and we found many, and they were pierced here to be put in necklace, but just to count them. Then we found this. You see the reference to cattle, because cattle was important in that society, and it was found also by the others. And there are several examples, and the most important one, which unfortunately I have to say has been moved to the Israeli Museum from the Rockefeller, is made of ivory. So again, the evidence that the palace is the palace. This is the tournet, the potter's wheel. This was an innovation at that time. It was like the mobile phone for nowadays. So it's something very, very, very innovative, because you could produce pottery easily and of a high quality. So the palace kept these basalt discs, because they were precious. They were done by someone who knew how to do this. And then there is, of course, the weapon. Weapons made of copper are really a symbol of power, and these are not to fight, but just a symbolic weapon, symbol of power. Then there was also an axe, and then there was an Egyptian palette. This was imported from Egypt, and in a tomb we found this, the canyon, and this is in Amman, and I could study it, fortunately. And this is a mace made of marble, and this was actually the symbol of the king's scepter. So all these items come from the area of the palace. So you see that the palace was the center of the city. And this was Palestine at that time. And this is what I called the copper route, because the copper route has a very important outcome. The outcome is that as the Palestinians went to the copper route, there were the Egyptians going to the same copper. So they met in the Sinai, they met in the Arabah, and they exchanged their culture. This was what happened. These are discoveries in Wadi Fainan. This is Tel El-Khasi, that is right here. And you see that the shape of this is exactly of this, or this is exactly what they found in Wadi Fainan to mold the axis. And this is what we found, the same thing more or less in Jordan, in Batrawi, in another palace of the same period. So there is the copper root, there is this kind of weapon which is very simple, but at that time is the symbol of a military class which has taken the power. And this is Timna, where the copper was extracted. Yeah. And this is, look how beautiful is this copper axe. So also this I skip because it's too but then everything arrived at the end again, and that's life. There was someone who was jealous, and the city was destroyed and set on fire. And we can say that it was not a natural event. It was a human agent who brought the destruction, because in some spots, for example, the wooden pillars have been taken away because they were of a certain value, and the other was set on fire, the old city. And from this final destruction, the city could not recover, because it has been organized to destroy Jericho at that time from someone. I think someone coming from Tel et Tel, from the mountains, or from Bethlehem, I don't know. And you see the excavation, you find the barn timbers, and you find the collapsed city walls, and the tamarisk, and so there is a new phase, and this phase in the history of Palestine is involved a larger area, because from a punctual people living or ruling, from the history of cities, that is the history of powerful people, we move to the history of tribes, which is shepherds spread all over the land. And from this point of view, our information is given by Necropolis and Tombs. And some of these tombs have been also excavated, again in cooperation with Dr. Mohammed Gayyada, who is here in Bethlehem, and in the site of Khaled Jama and Jebel Daher, where there was a huge necropolis. This necropolis belonged to tribes living in Wadiat, and each tribe chose a plateau, a rock plateau, usually are panoramic places, in which they buried the people. And the tombs are made in a very different way in respect of previous period, but they have a shaft and a chamber, and they usually in this time used individual burial. So what happened on the Tel? The Tel was a ruin, and they restart settling from the top area. So this is what we call EB4A, but don't go through these archaeological labels because they are too complicated. And then it spread again, because of course agriculture in Jericho always allows this growth, because it's such a favorable land that a community always spread. So they again built over the flanks of the site. So we see this, you see there are like terraces with buildings and houses and perhaps a sanctuary. We could find in our excavation one of the earliest tanur and settlement at the beginning when they arrived. So they arrived with a tent and they put over the ruins the tent. Then in some decades they become a village, and then again a city. And what is amazing is that this group, even though they were not so developed and complex like the previous one, they have kept the knowledge of the technology of metal. And they were the one who invented the alloy of copper and tin. And this was because as they were shepherds and they were merchants, and they used to move, they knew how to get tin, and they tried to create bronze in this way. So the earliest, this group of weapons that you see here are made of bronze, and they were found in Jericho by the German archaeologists in 1908, and they have this earliest shape. You see this is actually the previous axe that we have seen of the previous period, which has been added this, and is produced in a different way because they could fix much better the handle, the wooden handle, and it became a very strong weapon, much better than before, because they could do this through bronze. It's no more copper, which has to be tied up in another way. And these are British drawings showing the kind of tombs and the excavation of that at the time of Canaan. So the drawing showing this axe, which is called the Phoenix-strutted axe. So as this was accomplished, again the city became a fortified settlement. And this initial phase, it's less known. We don't know exactly how it started, but as it started, it was so monumental that it became again a monumental city, and this was possibly the most flourishing people in the history of ancient Palestine. So this is the Middle Bronze Age. And during the Middle Bronze Age, the town was defended by a system of rampart. That means at the beginning a city wall, and then it became the accumulation of earth, forming a ramp which was to hamper the use of battering rams against the city wall. So the wall is on top of this fortification, so the wall is still on top, but you can't reach it because there is a great barrier in between you. And of course, there should be gates. The gate of that period has never been found, and I think the one is again underneath the road. And there should be possibly another on the other side, but this has been also concealed under successive occupation layers. And what is nice is that the Italian Palestinian expedition discovered that there was a lower city, and there was this huge building, which unfortunately has been cut by the parking of the site that you know very well every day. But this huge building is really amazing. It looks like the one that I've seen in Syria or in Mesopotamia, because it's done in a very such a strong way that we have excavated this in 1998. So now it is 20 years that it is lasting. We have restored it many times, but in any case, it's a good example of all the mud brick architecture which is still preserved. It's really amazing. And what is interesting is the story of this building. I don't want to enter in several long details I could do, but also in this case, Egypt is possibly involved. Remember that the oasis of Jericho for the Egyptians was very similar to the Egyptian landscape. Making it different with the other, what they consider Asia in some bad way, while Jericho no, because Jericho was looked like Egypt. There was water, there was an African fauna, so they like to conquer it or to subjugate it. So you see the tower, how beautiful it is, and the restoration. Then there were houses. I have to say, and there was also a wooden vessel which was preserved, like this, or this, and another complex system of fortification. All this fortification means that there was wealth into the city. Otherwise, you don't spend all this money to protect yourself. And here you see a figurine of a lion. I think that this is a lioness. So it's very interesting because it may be the symbol of a goddess, with this god Ishtar, which is a great goddess of the kings of the north. So then the different kinds of fortification. This is really difficult to be explained to visitors because the magnificent stone wall actually was not to be seen. It was just the foot of the fortification, and it was buried underneath the rampart to keep it solidly and to avoid that someone could dig a tunnel to get into the city. So if you dig a tunnel, you found big stones like this. But the very wall was on top. So it actually was a monumental defense. And now we start to understand why the author of the Bible used this. Because it wanted to use something that everybody knew as an example of walls. And this is the palace. We have been cleaning and restoring this building also in the last days until this morning. This is really a wonderful one, and it's here the maps. So this one in the foreground is not the one that you see here. It's something which is over it, and it's of the later phase. And you have to understand also that there are steps. So at the same level of this, what is here actually is 300 later, because the corresponding area of this palace is 2 meters underneath. So there were 3 steps, and the palace has been rebuilt over the steps. And this was an entrance. This is nice because Canyon stopped here, and he concluded that this is a street entering the city, while as we excavated this corner, we found the gate, the entrance to the palace, the door. So this was not a street, but this was the street leading to the entrance of the palace to let the king go straight to the spring, because the spring is just underneath. So you see a drawing which shows a reconstruction of the city with the palace and the temple, because of course the public building at that time were the most important site. So now we came to the tomb which was under the palace, and of course this tomb is famous because studying what we had found, and which was excavated by my friend Niccolo Marchetti in 1999, I discovered that this scarab had concealed a name written in hieroglyphics. And a name and the title, this is really very important, because this fish and this sign here are a title in Egypt. That means governor, or literally is in Egyptian administrator of canals. That is really a good name for the governor of Jericho. While the lion and the sunset, which are 2 different signs, can be read, have no meaning in ancient Egyptian, but their sign can be read Ruha. So Ruha, for me, is the ancient name of the site. That is the same of today, and the title is Ajmer Ruha. That means the governor of Ruha. Why this is important for us? Because as soon now I know that Ruha is Jericho in Egyptian, I went through the Egyptian sources looking for Ruha, because there are many pharaohs which claim that they invaded Palestine and they conquered a city called Ruha. There are several. And the problem is that to locate this city, if the city is in a good itinerary in which Ruha can stay, because sometimes they go to the north, and sometimes it may be a mistake because they copied this. But when we found an inscription of an official, for example, saying I was sent by the pharaohs to struggle to conquer this, they call them those who live in the sand. You know, this is the name that the Egyptians give to the people living in Asia. And this was a ruler of Teledaba. So it's very important, because now a specific study has discovered that this scarab was actually produced in Teledaba. So I go straight to the conclusion. The conclusion is that the family of the kings of Jericho has got relatives to the pharaohs in Egypt during the 13th dynasty. So that means about 1700 BC. This is very important because the pharaohs who arrived after, that is the 18th dynasty, they didn't like this relationship between Palestine and the people of the Delta. And that's why they, again, attacked the Delta, attacked Palestine, and destroyed Jericho again. And this happened almost 1 century later. But if we compare what the Austrian archaeologists found in Teledaba and what we found in Tele Sultan, you see it's the same culture, it's the same kind of tomb. For example, this was a belt of a warrior which was found by Kenyon, and this is a belt which was found in Tel Daba. And this belt was made of leather and bronze, and it was put here on the bottom to protect the warrior during the fight. So now again, the massive fortification of this time, which extends in the oasis. So as you show, you can say, Kamal, that there is the city wall actually runs all around the spring, and could be seen, as you see. This is the Russell hat all around the side. And these are my drawings. This is a tentative reconstruction of the city with the palace and the temple. And this vessel, which was found by Gassan, which is thought to be again an ancestor of the king, which was adored in some ways. So the location of the possible temple. And this is the vessel which I was, yes, I have to, oh my gosh, on my car, aiuto. This is the vessel that I was studying in Paris when I discovered the leg of the so. At the end, Pharaoh Ahmose arrived and destroyed the city, and everything was put to an end. Actually, Jericho continued to live, and this is the late Bronze Age. Actually, there is someone who claims that the late Bronze is completely absent. Actually, there was the late Bronze, but it was the smallest site, and I have to say, this has nothing to do with the Bible. It's the history of the site. Forget the other things, because they have been written millennia after, is for telling a story which was invented on the basis of what they could see, but we can go straight to these correlations. You see, there is also a tablet which is in the Rockefeller Museum, which shows that in Jericho they could write, and they could write in Akkadian. So it's really interesting, because there are very few tablets found in Palestine. This is another story which is famous, that I was joking about this, but what is nice is the site is also a site in the Iron Age. And this is the king of Moab. Yes, the story is very nice. This is the king of Moab. Is that means the king south of Amman, and this king was so fat that the dagger remained into the bottom, as it was not possible to take it away. This picture, I think, which we can conclude with this, is a great success of our research, because this was found in 2018, after 1 century, and it is a German picture of 1918. And you see how the site already at that time had been attacked by terrible archaeologists. It has been, but you can see also how looked like the environment all around it. I hope this smoke are not bombs that the aircraft had launched over there. Otherwise, the history of Palestine is always the same. So, thank you for your kind attention. Please.
Have you found anything from the time of Joshua in the walls?
No. Because I don't know what is the time of Joshua. What is the time of Joshua is something that I think nobody knows. Joshua is a personage of the Bible. There are discussions between scholars, either it existed or not, but even if I can, for example, accept it is a guy who existed, we don't know the date in which he lived, and we don't know if he actually went to Jericho.
Is my question. Have you found any walls from the 13th century or 12th century?
This is I think that the Germans have found a wall of the late bronze, but I don't think it's of the 13th or 12th century. This is earlier. The latest evidence in the late bronze is about the 1400 BC. This is the only things that we could
So
find.
there was no wall in the 13th century?
Up to now, nobody has found this wall. There is not. But the site you have seen that is been extensively excavated. So the problem is not to try to find the correspondence, because the history of the Bible has been written as an example. So it is possible that as the people at that time, and I mean the 6th century BC, so many millennia after, wanted to give an example, and they say, okay, we have taken this city, which had beautiful walls, because the walls were renowned since, I think, the early Bronze Age, the earliest city, because it was famous for the walls, like Rome is famous for the Colosseum. If you want to write a novel about Rome, you say, okay, we destroyed the Colosseum, for example. So it was like this, it was an example.
So do you support the idea, the same you support the idea of Captain Timia, that the city of Jericho, it was destroyed much before Joshua, so like 300 or 400 years before.
I don't state that Joshua existed. I don't know if Joshua existed. If you have proof, we are speaking this is not a biblical lecture, I would say. I even open to speak with biblical scholars, but the question is, do you have positive proof of the life of Joshua? I don't have. Neither of the stories that are told about him. We have positive proof of the existence of a city. Its name was Ruha, possibly is Jericho of the Bible. This is the only link, has the same name. Then we can imagine that something happened. For example, the story of the king of Moab, it may be it happened that the king of Moab lived there. That was a king called Eglon, but we don't know all the other things. And this material was reused many centuries after. It was just reused for a narration which has a different goal. The goal is to educate to religion someone. So the goal was different. And I don't think that a good Jewish or a scholar of the Bible could get offended if I say that the book was written for religious purposes. It was not written to give us the information to go and dig. This is a completely different situation. Then, as regards the specific question, the answer is that there is no wall at that time or at the alleged time of the life of Joshua. And the latest, there is a gap, and as soon we get again a city, there is a wall, but the earliest wall, I think it appears about the 9th century or something like this, and it's not so beautiful. It's just reconstructing the old one. So, but you can be satisfied that the previous walls are beautiful, and they have been destroyed not by someone that we don't know if he lived. We know that it was destroyed by Ahmose, which is one famous pharaoh that we know that we have the body, we know where it was buried, so someone who is much more, I think, impressive in my mind of a literary personage. The lecture will be very short, and I would ask to my friend and in some weeks PhD of our university, Dr. Mohammed Gayada, to help me. Actually, he is the responsible of the results which I'm going to show you. And of course, you know much better than me the city and this environment, so I won't go through the description of these beautiful places such as Wadi Artas or Batir or all the region of Bethlehem, I would focus on the archaeology of this country, because one has to stress some point that there should be in Palestine, there should be a social concern about the preservation and safeguard of antiquities, because of course all this material is spread in the country. If anybody who builds a house or a road cuts through or a factory, a tomb, has to go to the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities to let this find be acknowledged and recorded and filed and protected. This is really a wealth of the country in the future, because you will have a museum, you will have people coming for being interested into these finds. These finds are very important. They are very, very important. I would say just one thing. Since when we have started to work in Bethlehem on this necropolis, I have been really, I would say in bracket, attacked by scholars interested in the human remains, because you should know that the latest frontier of archaeology is biology, the study of ancient DNA. This demonstrates how the population was distributed in antiquity, and it is enough one tooth of one person to know all his ancestors. So if they can extract the DNA, of course, a struggle has already started. I can see also this to the camera. Of course, you can imagine who has the hands in the power in this struggle. The major, I would straight to the main scholar studying these things is based in Harvard in the United States. And why I'm explaining this, because it's very, very important, this point, because you can map the population of the Earth, and this work is not made independently by each single scholar, like archaeology. I can, in Italy, have an opinion different from one in Australia. The DNA has to be studied together, because there is just one bank of the data, which is in the hand of someone. I won't mention, but you imagine. So what happens? That how you can check the bank, because these are, each individual has millions of data. So you would say, this is crazy, why are you speaking about this? No, I am speaking because so you became aware of how important is any skeleton you can find in a pit in your home. This is important for science. It's important in the future, because I have a fear that someone would use this for stating we are from there or from there. While there is a concept which is very, very important. Culture and population are two different things. I can be Italian and I can study German and have even a car which is German. And my culture is not so easy to be established, but it has nothing to do with my blood. So this is a very important concept. So if you demonstrate that, for example, the Italians have arrived from Saudi Arabia, let's say something which is strange, this is nothing to do with culture. This don't change our culture. And actually what DNA demonstrates is that we are all mixed up. So we have been mixed since the time of the hunters and gators, because the human beings like moving. It's alhamdulillah that we like moving. The difference is how to preserve our culture, because this is also our duty, that we have to preserve what our fathers have given to us, or our mothers have transmitted to us. So Now we move to funerary archaeology. That is what Mohammed likes a lot. I don't like at all. I would prefer to keep these poor guys sleeping for the eternity in peace, not having the archaeologists cutting or breaking the entrance of the tomb. But so you know where is Bethlehem. You know that there are a lot of museums. And you see the site of Kalejama with the establishment of a factory and other relevant site in the nearby. You know that Bethlehem has also the remains of an elephant. So this is really, again, demonstrating the relationship between Palestine and Africa. And these are some of the main finds from the region. What is interesting, for example, is that these 5 arrowheads that because of the antique market are in the hands of the Israelis, and I have to say this, so please stop the antique market or give it to the Palestinian Authority. They demonstrate that the earliest example of alphabet are from this region. So alphabet was developed for the first time in this region all over the world. So take care if you find a sign, because it may be early alphabet. Then other beautiful sites that thanks to Mohammed we have been able to know, because of course for you these are very common places, but for example for Italians they are known. And the Basilica of Nativity, which now is really in a period of great success. So I can't enter anymore. I don't know, only at 6 in the morning. And you know these things. And I would focus on Kalejama. You know that it was discovered by chance, and because of the police of tourism became aware that there was something wrong, and with the joint effort of the Department of Antiquities, and especially Mohammed, but many other people took part, if you want to mention them, in these savage excavations, it became clear that out of at least 30 tombs which had been located and excavated, some of them had been looted, some not, but which make a very interesting group. There is at least another area that I calculated that could be another 30 or 40 or 50 tombs. So it's huge necropolis. And why is important that this is huge necropolis? Because this is not only a necropolis of a nomad tribe, but it's a necropolis of the city. So it's a different, because it makes us aware that there was a city. You know that the city is considered one of the smallest city of Palestine, and the Franciscan fathers have excavated and studied it, especially, of course, the Church of Nativity and the surroundings. But information about the earliest city of Bethlehem was missing. For example, in the 2nd millennium, while these tombs are from that period. So this gave us the hint at knowing the city of Bethlehem well before it is known up to now. How it started, for example, because as in these tombs we have, together with, you see how beautiful is the material. There are weapons, and there are these, for example, sister jugs, and there are 2 kinds of shafts, square or circular. And there are another important information is that tombs have been cut several times. So that means that the necropolis was crowded, so the population was numerous, and it was a city. This is because otherwise you move and you find another cave to another place. Then you see how many weapons we found, and also these scarabs, which are again connected with the Egyptian relationship that I mentioned before. So it's really an interesting site. What is important is that there are these 4 spouted lamps which are dated to the EB4, that is the period, let's say, in which Kenyans claim that arrived the Amorites. And then the same tomb as inside people of the Middle Bronze Age. So this marks the continuity between the opening of the tombs and the use through 2 different periods, sometimes 3 periods, from the early Bronze 4 to the late Bronze. So that means a long continuity, and this is again another proof in favor of a city. Because if you continue to use the same tomb, that means that you live there. You are not a nomad that is moving all around the wadis of the region. So that's very nice. And you see that the lamp was put into a niche into the tomb. Then there is also an extension in which one tomb is really very interesting, because this tomb is dating from the Iron Age, so a later period, and is a huge tomb that I hope some days we can finish to explore before the other. We will see. Then there are also other installations just over, like this Byzantine wine press. Don't go there and dig other tombs, please. Khaled Jama. And then you see the remains of the skulls and EB4 tombs. And of course, there was also an important female burial, which is somewhat rare in the late Bronze. You see the pottery sherds. While one tomb, which is called the Barmill Tombs, this is the name of the family, I don't know, of the owner of the house, which is in the nearby, was dated to the Iron Age. And this is very interesting because it's very rare that the same necropolis is used from the Bronze Age, the early Bronze Age, down to the Iron Age. That means that there is a city in the nearby. This is the answer that we could find. This jug is of a type which has parallels and connection with the Phoenicians, so with the coast. And this is also very interesting because it's painted in the style of Phoenicians. So again, this city, even though it's in the middle of the mountains, has strong relationships through trade. And it is even possible that because of the water which is in the area of Bethlehem, all caravans like to stop here. And so it became a market and a place of exchange. And you see how many finds. These are small juglets for ointments for ladies. So they are usually found in a number which is between 7 and 11 in tombs, and they should have a meaning connected, for example, with the burial or with the treatment of the body of the dead person. So they are really a special find. Then there is another site which is called, explain the Manteca. While the tombs were really nice, also in this case, you see this is always the same, let's say, model. A cave with a shaft, and then there is a big stone at the entrance of the shaft. And you see, in this case, it's very interesting that the bed for the body was preserved, made of stones. So it's a good, really good retrieval.
Which period is this?
This is also from the early Bronze 4 to the Middle Bronze. The Middle Bronze Age is characterized by this shape which is called the dipper, and an expert is just aside me because he has done a study of all this pottery. I wanted to show.
So no religious artifacts?
No.
Like would we know which religion? The Israelites?
No, no, it's earlier than the arrival of the Israelites. The one of the Iron Age, I don't think, because what is really nice is that you see that there is this knife which is different from the others, this small dagger, which has big rivets, big nails, and this one is a type which is typical of the Mycenaeans, that means from Greece, Yonan. And astonishingly, as the DNA of the guy has been extracted in New Zealand by a scholar, because we had a tooth for doing this, it came out that the guy comes from Greece. So it's really one very rare case in which you have the weapon and the guy, so it maybe it's a soldier or someone who arrived from abroad and lived in Bethlehem. It's really incredible, this one. So this is what the old findings up to now. And now I think that what is important is to keep memory, to put in the map and to try to document all this material and to protect it as much as it's possible. And I have to say that Mohammed is doing really a great job from this point of view. This is another tomb that he has saved several years ago, but this is important because it's from the EB4, so a different. And of course, I would like to know if there is an official museum where all this stuff should be. Inshallah, there are 5 museums, but I don't understand what is the museum. Or I don't know. No, because this is very important. You see, the jars of this period, and of course several articles that we published on this subject, including one entitled Bethlehem Before David, because otherwise they know only David of Bethlehem. This was before, and there were many finds in this. So thank you very much, and this is the
بس حابين انه نقدم كمان شكر لكل الاشخاص اللي حضروا على هذا المكان حتى يكونوا جزء من هذه المحاضره. احنا كثير مشكورين للدكتور لورينزو على وجوده، بس كمان كيف فتح الكتاب المقدس دائما رح تفتح ابوابها لمحاضرات من هالنوع، وبالترتيب مع الاستاذ هيثم رح يكون احنا اخذنا ايميلاتكم، وان شاء الله رح نكون اكثر واكثر بالتواصل معكم على محاضرات مختلفه اللي بتختص حقيقة في تاريخ فلسطين، في آثار فلسطين، وكمان في أمور مهمة بتساعد الأدلاء السياحيين ودارسين الكتاب المقدس حتى يتطوروا في علمهم وفي ثقافتهم. فما فينا إلا نقدم كمان شكر حقيقة دكتور. Thank you so much.